They shoved him into lockers. They laughed at his accent. They called him names no child should ever hear. Elon Musk was the kid nobody wanted to be friends with. But what they didn't know was that the quiet boy they humiliated every single day was about to change the world. Years later, when Elon returned to his old school, nobody recognized him at first. But when they did, their jaws dropped. Because the boy they bullied relentlessly was now the richest man on the planet. And the way he got his revenge? He didn't even have to say a single word. Elon Musk was different from the start. While other kids were playing soccer, he was reading entire encyclopedias for fun. He wasn't interested in gossip or parties. His mind was always somewhere else, solving problems no one else could even understand. But in Pretoria, South Africa, where Elon grew up, standing out wasn't a good thing. It made you a target. The bullying started small, a few mean comments, a shove here and there. But the more Elon ignored them, the worse it got. His home life wasn't a sanctuary either. Elon's parents divorced when he was just 9 years old. He chose to live with his father, a decision he would later describe as the biggest mistake of my life. His father was emotionally abusive, tearing down Elon's self-esteem day by day. I had a terrible childhood, Elon would later admit in interviews. I was raised by books. Fantasy and science fiction were my escape. By age 10, Elon had taught himself computer programming using a Commodore VIC-20, a primitive home computer. By 12, he had created his first video game, a space-themed adventure called Blaster, and sold the code to a computer magazine for $500. But his classmates didn't see a budding genius. They saw an easy target. One day, it went too far. A group of older boys cornered him outside the school cafeteria. "Think you're smarter than us, huh, genius?" one sneered. Before Elon could even react, bam! A fist slammed into his stomach, knocking the air out of him. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath while the bullies laughed. They didn't stop there. They dragged him outside and beat him so badly that he had to be hospitalized for a week. One of them even broke his nose. Nobody stepped in. Not the teachers, not the students. He was alone, bruised, bleeding. But something changed in him that day. He made a decision. He wasn't going to fight back with fists. He wasn't going to waste his time proving himself to people who didn't believe in him. He was going to build something so great that one day they would all regret ever doubting him. And that's exactly what he did. At 17, Elon knew he had to leave South Africa. The country's mandatory military service loomed, and he wanted no part in supporting the apartheid regime. There was another reason too. America was where innovation happened. The land of opportunity called to him. Using his mother's Canadian citizenship as a pathway, Elon left everything behind. He arrived in Canada with almost nothing, just a backpack, a few dollars, and the address of a distant relative. "I remember sleeping on the floor in a cousin's house," Elon would later recall. "I would shower at the YMCA. I had exactly one suitcase of clothes and books." For a year, he took odd jobs, cutting wood in Vancouver, cleaning boilers, and even working at a farm. The boy who was once beaten for being different was now scrubbing toilets to survive. But Elon had a plan. He attended Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania on a scholarship. He worked multiple jobs while carrying a full course load, sometimes sleeping just 4 hours a night. His roommates thought he was crazy. They'd wake up at 7 a.m. to find Elon already deep in books or coding on his computer, having never gone to sleep the night before. "I figured if I could dedicate 100 hours a week to school and work, while my classmates were doing 50, I could achieve in 4 years what would normally take 8, he explained. And he did. He graduated with degrees in both economics and physics, a rare double major that perfectly positioned him for his future endeavors. But when he told his professors about his dreams, electric cars, solar energy, space travel, they just laughed. "Focus on something realistic," they told him. "Those are pipe dreams." Elon just smiled politely. He'd heard it all before. Years passed. Elon moved to America with nothing but ambition. He was accepted into a PhD program at Stanford, a dream opportunity for most. But after just 2 days, he dropped out. The internet was exploding. Opportunities were everywhere, and Elon couldn't wait. "I could either watch it happen or be part of it," he said. He worked tirelessly, slept in his office, showered at the local YMCA, and spent every waking moment chasing one goal: to change the world. First, he built Zip2, a simple idea: online city guides for newspapers. But nobody believed in it. Not even his own business partners. They told him he was wasting his time, that newspapers would never go digital. Elon ignored them. He worked 100-hour weeks, coding all night, knocking on doors by day. The office was so small that he slept under his desk and showered at a nearby gym. For food, he survived mostly on hot dogs and oranges from a nearby 7-Eleven, the cheapest calories he could find. Once, when the servers crashed at 2 a.m., Elon stayed up for 48 hours straight, fixing the code line by line while his partners slept. "If you're going to start a company," he later advised, "be prepared to work like hell, at least 80 to 100 hours a week. That's what it takes." And in just a few years, he sold Zip2 for $307 million. Elon's share? $22 million. He was 27 years old. Most people would have stopped there, bought a mansion, retired early, lived in luxury. But Elon? He immediately invested almost all of it into his next venture. Next, he built PayPal. Again, people laughed at it. "An online payment system? That'll never work. People will never trust the internet with their money." Elon ignored them again. The early days of PayPal were brutal. Fraud was rampant. Banks were hostile. Regulations were unclear. The company was losing millions each month to credit card chargebacks. In 2000, Elon was ousted as CEO while on his honeymoon. The board thought he was pushing too hard, moving too fast, being too ambitious. But Elon stayed on, working tirelessly to fix the fraud issues. He created a sophisticated algorithm that could detect and prevent most fraudulent transactions, a system so effective that it's still used today in modified forms. And PayPal became one of the most successful online payment platforms in history, selling for $1.5 billion. Elon's share, $180 million. Now most people would definitely retire. After all, he had won at life by any conventional standard. But even after all that, people still doubted him. In 2001, Elon became fascinated with Mars. He wanted to see NASA send a small greenhouse to the Red Planet, a mission he called Mars Oasis. He traveled to Russia to buy refurbished ICBMs that could serve as rockets, but the Russians laughed at him. "You're not a rocket scientist," they told him. "Go back to counting your money." That night, on the plane home, Elon did some calculations on a napkin. He realized he could build rockets himself for a fraction of the going price. "I tend to approach things from a physics framework," Elon explained. "Physics teaches you to reason from first principles rather than by analogy." And so, in 2002, with $100 million of his own money, he founded SpaceX. The goal was simple but audacious: make space travel affordable. Eventually, make humans a multi-planetary species. Around the same time, he met with a small group of engineers who had an idea for an electric car company. They showed him a prototype, little more than a golf cart with a fancy shell. But Elon saw the future. He invested nearly all his remaining fortune in this tiny startup called Tesla, originally serving as chairman, while the founders handled day-to-day operations. When he announced Tesla, SpaceX, and later Solar City, the world called him crazy. An electric car company? That's doomed to fail. Private rockets? Impossible. Even NASA and the auto industry mocked him. They called him reckless, a fool, a dreamer with no grasp on reality. How can a man with no experience in the auto industry build a car company from scratch? They sneered. How can a startup launch rockets when even billion-dollar governments fail? But one by one, Elon proved them all wrong. By 2008, Elon was facing financial ruin. The Great Recession had hit, and both his companies were on the brink of collapse. At Tesla, he put everything on the line. The company was just days away from bankruptcy. Employees were quitting, investors were pulling out. The media was calling Tesla the biggest failure in Silicon Valley history. The first Tesla Roadster deliveries were plagued with problems. Transmissions failed. Battery systems overheated. Each car was costing far more to produce than the selling price. Meanwhile, at SpaceX, the first 3 rocket launches had failed spectacularly. Each explosion burned through millions of dollars. The company had only enough money for one more attempt. Elon was going through a divorce. The media was tearing him apart. He was almost broke, living off loans from friends. He had a choice: give up or invest every last penny he had to keep his dreams alive. His friends told him to quit. His family begged him to stop. But Elon, he bet everything. His entire fortune. I could either keep all the money for myself, he recalled, or I could put it into Tesla and SpaceX and have an 80 to 90% chance of losing it all. He worked 120-hour weeks, sleeping on the factory floor. He personally inspected cars, called suppliers, and even borrowed money just to pay his workers. There were times when I was literally living in the Fremont Tesla factory, Elon revealed. I had a sleeping bag in a conference room adjacent to the manufacturing line. Christmas Eve, 2008. While most people were celebrating with family, Elon was working alongside his engineers, trying to fix the transmission issues that plagued the Roadster. "We're either going to fix this," he told his team, "or Tesla dies. There is no middle ground." And then, a miracle. In December 2008, with just hours to spare before SpaceX would have run out of money, NASA awarded the company a $1.6 billion contract. Days later, Tesla secured last-minute funding. Elon had bet everything and won, by the narrowest of margins. And today, Tesla is the most valuable car company in the world. But Tesla wasn't his only battle. SpaceX ? It was mocked, ridiculed, and called a joke. The experts said, "This isn't a sci-fi movie. A private company can't build rockets." The first 3 launches failed. Millions of dollars burned. SpaceX was on the verge of collapse. And then, the 4th launch. If this failed, it was over. Elon watched as the rocket ascended into the sky, the world holding its breath. And then, success. For the first time, SpaceX had done what seemed impossible. But Elon wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. He wanted to land the rockets, make space travel cheaper, and one day, colonize Mars. People called him insane. They laughed at his dreams. While managing both Tesla and SpaceX, Elon still found time to reimagine other industries. In 2013, he published his Hyperloop concept, a new transportation system that could theoretically transport people between San Francisco and Los Angeles in just 35 minutes. When critics said it couldn't be done, Elon released all his research to the public domain, challenging the world to prove him wrong. In 2015, he co-founded OpenAI, dedicating resources to ensure artificial intelligence would benefit humanity. Ironically, he would later become one of the loudest voices warning about AI's potential dangers. In 2016, he created Neuralink, a company developing brain-machine interfaces that could help people with severe neurological conditions and eventually allow humans to merge with AI. And in 2020, Starlink began providing internet access to remote regions of the world, bypassing the need for traditional infrastructure. Each venture seemed more outlandish than the last. Each one was met with the same skepticism. And yet, one by one, these impossible ideas began materializing into reality. And then one day, Elon did something that changed history. A SpaceX rocket launched into the sky, and for the first time ever, it landed back on Earth in one piece. The entire world watched in awe. NASA, the same agency that once doubted him, now pays SpaceX billions to take astronauts to space. But the journey was far from over. Success came at a cost. Elon worked so hard that his health suffered. He rarely saw his children. His marriages failed. The reality is great highs, terrible lows, and unrelenting stress, Elon once tweeted. Don't think people want to hear about the last 2? Tesla faced sabotage. A former employee leaked confidential data, trying to destroy the company from within. SpaceX almost went bankrupt, again. Elon was hit with lawsuits, stock crashes, and relentless media attacks. He was called a fraud, a con man, a failure waiting to happen. In a 2018 interview with the New York Times, he broke down in tears, describing the excruciating year he'd had. He was working 120 hours a week, sometimes not leaving the factory for days. He nearly missed his brother's wedding. He spent his birthday alone at work. There were times when I didn't leave the factory for 3 or 4 days, he admitted. Days when I didn't go outside. The pressure became so intense that Elon's tweets became erratic. The SEC sued him. Tesla stock plummeted. Board members begged him to step back, but Elon refused to give up. He refused to slow down. Because every time he looked at his companies, he didn't see corporations or balance sheets. He saw the future of humanity. And then, in the midst of it all, he was invited back to South Africa, a special event, a gathering of some of the most influential people in the country. Elon stepped onto the stage. The cameras flashed. The audience murmured. And among them, his old classmates, the same kids who had called him names, the same ones who had pushed him down, told him he'd never amount to anything. But now, they weren't laughing. They weren't sneering. They weren't calling him names. They were silent. Because standing before them wasn't just the nerdy kid they had bullied. It was the richest, most powerful man in the world. The man who built an empire. The man who reshaped technology, energy, and space travel. One former bully approached him after the talk, head bowed in shame. I don't know if you remember me, the man stammered. Elon smiled. I remember everyone, he said quietly. The man tried to apologize, but Elon waved it away. The past is just that, the past, he said. What matters is what we build for the future. And as Elon smiled, he didn't have to say another word. His success was the only answer they needed. But this is where most stories stop, because while the world celebrated, Elon was already thinking about the next step. You see, most billionaires would retire at this point. They'd buy islands, live in luxury, and never work another day in their life. But not Elon, because he had a promise to keep. As a child, he dreamed of a world where humans were no longer trapped on Earth. And now, he had the power to make that happen. So, he made an announcement that shook the world. We're going to Mars. The media called it a fantasy. Experts laughed. There's no way. It's impossible. Elon just smiled, because he had heard those words before. When he started Tesla, when he started SpaceX, when he was just a bullied kid in South Africa, and every time he had proved them wrong. So he went to work. He built the most powerful rocket in human history, the Starship. A ship designed to take people beyond Earth, beyond the moon, all the way to Mars. Test after test, explosion after explosion, failure after failure. He kept going. Engineers worked around the clock. Elon often slept in a small room at the launch facility, ready to solve problems at a moment's notice. When critics pointed out the dangers and impossibilities of Mars colonization, Elon acknowledged them openly. The first journeys to Mars will be dangerous, he admitted. People will probably die. That's the reality of exploring frontiers. But he also shared his deeper motivation. If we make life multiplanetary, there may come a day when some plants and animals die out on Earth but are still alive on Mars, he explained. The probable lifespan of human civilization will be much greater if we're a multiplanetary species. And one day, just like before, it worked. The world watched as Starship lifted off, carrying the dreams of an entire species. And for the first time in history, humans had the technology to become an interplanetary species. But here's the real twist. Elon doesn't want to go to Mars to prove people wrong anymore. He doesn't need revenge. Because true visionaries don't chase success to silence their haters. They chase success because they see a world that doesn't exist yet. And they refuse to stop until they make it real. When asked about his legacy, Elon doesn't mention wealth or recognition. I just want to think about the future and not be sad, he says. Behind the companies, the rockets, the cars, and the tunnels, there's still that same boy who was beaten up outside the cafeteria. The difference is that now, instead of dreaming about changing the world, he's actually doing it. When something is important enough, Elon says, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. So this story isn't just about Elon Musk. It's about every person who has ever been doubted, every person who has ever been told they can't, every dreamer who stares at the stars while others stare at the ground. Because if there's one thing Elon Musk proved, it's this. Your past does not define you. Your bullies do not define you. Your failures do not define you. Only you define you. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Elon's story isn't the wealth or the rockets or the cars. It's that he never stopped being that curious child who asked why and why not. In a world obsessed with quick profits and instant gratification, Elon focused on century-scale problems. Climate change, sustainable energy, making life multiplanetary. When faced with problems, he didn't accept conventional solutions. He reimagined entire industries from first principles. I think it's important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy, Elon explains. The normal way we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We are doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it is like what other people are doing. It's mentally easier. But Elon chose the harder path. First principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world. You boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, what are we sure is true? And then reason up from there. That approach has allowed him to see opportunities where others see only roadblocks. So next time someone laughs at your dreams, next time someone tells you you can't, next time life beats you down and tells you to quit, just remember, they laughed at Elon Musk too. And now, he's on his way to Mars. And the people who laughed at him, they're still stuck on Earth. The choice is yours. Will you let others define what's possible? Or will you, like Elon, redefine the possible?